All right, so this is our first and only session on the short essay, The Question Concerning Technology from, if I can get it, from Basic Writings, or from the Harper Row collection, if that's where you want to get it. But it's a one-off to do this between the stuff we just finished on basic questions to we're going to do next time. This is a suggestion of Pete and I agree. The Parmenides, which gets us to the aletheia understanding of truth by way of basically the intro to Parmenides' poem, rather than getting much into the actual poem itself, and then some also reflections on Plato and the Plain of Lethe and the end of the Republic, and a few other things along the way. But basically, the aletheia understanding of truth in the Greeks, and then a bunch of stuff about how he's reacting to all that. So anyway, that's the thing we're planning on doing next. That's, if I can get this book. In terms of the amount, the first 57 pages of this edition is what I'm thinking. That takes us to the end of section 3 of part 1. So all the way through the discussion of pseudos, basically. And the idea would be then we do the rest of part 1 as a second session and use a third session for the shorter part 2. But that would mean it would be 3 sessions total to try to do the book. To give people a little more time to get it and do the first 57 pages, I'm planning to have it be like 5 weeks from now would be the time. So let's see, that's the 18th of May. And then also move in an hour earlier, start at noon, Arizona or California time, to give a little bit of relief to some of our overseas people like Pete. So anyway, if anyone has any problems with that, you can mention them in your first reactions round. But that's the plan. 5 weeks from now, first 57 pages of Parmenides as the thing we're going to do next. And then, as always, feel free to share with me other things you might want to do. We're going to have 3 months or so to think over that, but not too early to put in suggestions for things to do next if you're interested in a particular thing. All right, that's enough for what we're going to do next and the basic reading here. We're going to get a round robin. I think everybody knows the format or has been told the format. So we have a Peter and a Pete, so I'm going to go with Pete to start us off.
All right, so yeah, read it before, read it again 2 or 3 weeks ago, and also read some of the papers commenting on it, and every time I read it, I get something more out of it. But nothing else to mention right now.
Is there any particular thing that you want to focus on as maybe, I don't know, the thing you found most recently about it that was new to you or anything like that?
So in terms of what we've done before, the way the challenging fourth relates to the opening, the clearing, which I hadn't picked up on before. And there was a paper by Daniel Dahlstrom that clued me into that, and the 3 levels of essence that relates back to the what was the essence paper we read before? Essence of Truth.
Yep.
And so that was what I picked up this time.
Okay. Fine. Well, some people may have questions about that themselves. Barry, you want to go next? Did you do the reading familiarity, first reactions?
Yeah, I've never read Heidegger before. I've mostly just been reading existentialist novels, and I've become more and more interested in the different types of philosophical arguments and developments. But I found this extremely compelling, and it made me think about the question of our relationship to technology in terms of how things are manifested in our lives, in existence, that don't exist in nature itself, but originate out of, I don't know, various experiences, ideas, observations, previous technologies, to the point where we develop this thing that we don't really have a clear understanding of what our relationship is to it and what means or ends it serves in the long run. I just I was blown away by the whole thing.
Mhm.
I have to confess, I need to get a much clearer understanding of the use of language that he uses. I kind of had an intuitive sense of some of what he was saying, but I don't have a real clear sense of what he might be trying to communicate.
Yeah, he definitely is laying out a conceptual structure here with, subtle distinctions along the way, and it helps.
Yeah.
Some of those things do have poetic overtones he means you to hear, but he also means them in more, precise technical senses, and that can be challenging.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was also kind of, and I'd like to get some more clarity around this, how he draws on Aristotle, but then he seems to um, rely on Plato's concepts to kind of help develop his idea and understanding, almost drawing on the metaphysics of Plato to make more sense of the natural world kind of thing. I'm not sure how those two things relate, but it was fascinating to me how he drew on those.
Yeah, I mean the poetic as the bringing forth as poiesis, he does specifically cite Plato on that. It's characteristic of Heidegger that he's not about making the subtle distinctions within the Greeks of this is from Aristotle, and this is from Plato, and this is what other Greeks like Protagoras might have thought at the time, etc. But instead, he's thinking of the Greeks as a formation, mostly Socratic formation, but also and what's there in the language, what's there in their questions, and he's especially inclined to bring out in what ways that is different from how we hear or feel things now. But we can definitely talk about some of those. I have some comments on some of the ways in which he's dealing with the history here. There's places here where he suggests that there's an understanding of bringing forth that's sort of the basic or fundamental Greek position that is changed as it's translated into Latin and the medievals, something like that. And I think we can point to places where some of that change had happened earlier within the Greeks, but only a silo or shard within the Greeks, if you get me. I had one other reaction to some of the things you said. You talked about that isn't there in nature itself. Not clear how much we know that. Right. But I appreciate the perspective, and we'll try to bring some of that out. You also mentioned in terms of its use or ends or utility of our interactions with something like that, and whether or not that is the proper frame for thinking about these things is definitely one of the things being challenged here, right? Is this about a for human ends instrumentality kind of understanding? Because how instrumentality arises is, and what status it has, is definitely one of the things that's in play here. And that can be challenging to track because it is often when I say often, I mean for many people, it's a kind of core orientating set of concepts that they slot things into, and to have that be something which is itself in play can be hard. It's a challenging one to revise frameworks, if you get me. Okay, John, first reactions.
Hi, Jason.
Hi.
I read it. First time I've read it. I've heard the word enframing thrown around sort of in other people's discussions and other things I've read, but so it's definitely a big thought experiment for sure. And I guess that for me, one of the things that I feel is lacking is like more context. Like, is this the way Heidegger has always thought about technology, especially in the 30s during the war? So that's one part of it. Maybe we could, if you have time, could maybe talk about the difference between the 30s and the 53 when he's delivering this. The other
Sorry,
thing,
interrupt you for just a second. Your audio is coming through statically, and it may be because of bandwidth. So I'm going to suggest you turn your video off while you're talking. It makes it easier to hear you.
Sure.
We did hear every word. It's just sometimes they were delayed a little bit. So
okay. Yeah, sorry. I'm also a little bit of distance away from my mic. Let's try this.
okay. Thanks.
Okay. The other thing I'm just going to read, it's something Pete brought up, challenging forth as the mode of revealing is not given by us humans, it is given or granted to us. We are in this view merely lumps of raw material, not responsible for it and unable to extract ourselves from it. There's a lot of problems for me in that line of thinking. And so I'm just hoping that we can dig in a little bit.
We
I
absolutely
would say I'm
Absolutely.
agnostic right now about that view that Heidegger has.
Yeah. So I mean, one way to think about it is that even if one believes that these, if I go this way, major philosophical epochs are things of man's making in some broader or Hegelian sense of man, perhaps, still the human individual in a particular era, in a particular philosophical dispensation, will still feel that, if I put it this way, socially enacted, pervasive understanding of truth as something which he himself did not simply make, right? It's something he is going to inherit as part of the historical site or place in which he finds himself, into which he is thrown, so to speak. There may be another sense in which Heidegger is speaking about how much this is sent as opposed to decided upon by man, and there's a whole theory of what counts as true history or free response to dispensations of being, something like that going on here. And you're right to put a finger on that as something which is controversial, meant to be an almost extreme claim about how these things unfold. But even if that is a challenge, it's easy to see that there is a sense in which the living in the era of the challenging revealing is different from living in the era of the Greeks, if you get me.
Sure, sure.
And regardless of how one responds to that individually, we'll go over the various ways he talks about that people have of responding to technology or trying to gain some sense of mastery or freedom with respect to it before the method he is advocating and trying to demonstrate here. He sees limitations in those other reactions, if you get me. But another thing that would be useful here is to recognize that Heidegger is hardly the first person to make claims like this about something like the nature of modernity as a major historical epoch in which trapped is not quite the right word, in which man exists, is destined, whatever it is his historical situation. And it is not simply the conscious creation of one individual, certainly not of each present individual, something like that. That's something you find in lots of other historical traditions in the 19th century. Think of Hegel and Marx, for example, or Nietzsche in his own way. Anyway, just to give some access to what he's talking about here about this is not simply man's making. There is a deeper sense of that he does intend, but it's not simply your making as the personal individual. It's not like you can decide that you're not living in the world in which that is the dominant mode of revealing. Does that make sense?
Sure. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Good comment. We'll definitely try to raise that. Dan, you want to go next?
Sure. So I read this way back, like way back, and then 5 years ago, and then but since then I read a lot of Heidegger, and it was great to reread it now, and more insight, I think, and more. I saw a lot of things that I didn't see before. So I think the first thing, I'm surprised of the style. So this is kind of the latest style. It's no, you don't see their being, you don't see their design, you don't see anything. He introduced that in framing term, and he's apologizing for it and so on. It's the language is very straightforward in a way, but as you said, he goes back to these primitive words and try to connect to meanings that are buried there, and try to show them to us and show their what he means by different things. So that was very interesting. The first half it's kind of like technical. The second half he goes very kind of prophetic and so on. He projects and danger and hope and so on. Let's see what else. So of course, I think the main thing that it's here strikes me is this idea that, and it's such a difficult concept to try to understand technology as something that is not technological. And I think he makes the point at the very end that in order to do this, you need to have like a framework or whatever, an understanding that it's even more fundamental than technology itself. And that's probably that's the reason Heidegger is able to do it and almost no one else was capable. I remember reading Jacques Ellul at some book about technology, and the guy kind of was very good, but it's interesting to see that he approached technology, for example, from a Marxist or Christian, fundamentalist Christian or anarchist perspective in order to get a deep understanding of technology. And it's something similar here, but of course Heidegger goes even deeper. And of course it's interesting this kind of to say to someone, especially these days, that technology actually it's a form of poesis. Well, it doesn't go very well, you know, like it's something so deep and so difficult to grasp anyway. And of course, it's interesting to see this connection with poiesis, how the techne was a mode of revealing, and it still is to Heidegger, how it's was the form of modern technology with this enframing and so on. And then another theme that ran there, and it's very interesting to me, is the one vis-a-vis causality. It's there, and I was always interested in modern
was more biased or less biased.
I'm sorry, someone has some background noise.
Yeah, it's this time like he goes there to those four causes, and he said, well, the Greeks kind of is not exactly causality. This is kind of a fallen understanding to understand things in this kind of in causality framework. And he gives the example of, like, I don't know, when we see technology as an instrument, we inevitably fall there in causality. And he gives the example of Heisenberg and how things kind of fall apart in modern science, and causality is no longer relevant. And you know that all these big thinkers, they struggle with this. What's causality? What's the nature? And it seems like Heidegger is doing it here also. And
there's no question
I guess I'll stop here.
I was going to say, there's no question that section is informed by, public lectures Heisenberg was giving at the time, right? So he's reacting to previous contemporary lectures for some of that framing. He probably had separate conversations with Heisenberg himself because they were friends. But one of the things you mentioned is that, he's not talking about being Dasein everywhere. Mostly true, but he does get at being when he keeps talking about essence. And it's important to realize that that's going on in this when he talks about having a response to something's essence, that sort of thing. Realize that that's the way being is being talked about here. He's not highlighting it, making it, putting a capital B on it and emphasizing it, but it's still there. All the places where he talks about differentiating between technology and the essence of technology, not being anything technological. The essence there is actually doing quite a bit of work, and it's not simply, as Pete pointed out, there's multiple levels of essence, but here it's something like it is doing being work. It is the being of something.
Just one more thing, like you mentioned essence, that I found that also great there. He goes into essence and say that goes like what endures, and then he tried to see how Plato saw that in ideas, and Aristotle saw it in different way, and then metaphysics saw it in essence. And he's going, we need to go over this. And I really like also that, like taking a shot of essence and saying this is not what we are looking for here. This is the direction, but essence is not the right concept. And I really like that there. at the end when he turns against essence. And
Yeah, he's not turning against it quite as much as you might think. He's when he's talking about bringing into the open, motive revealing, bringing forth, all of those are taking pieces of how he understands being as event and describing the stuff that he's talking about truth with that terminology, with that mechanics, so to speak. But he's not focusing on he's not harping on the word. He's just using the structure that he sees in something like being as event. Anyway, it's clear to me from the different places along the way that that's in the background there, but he's not trying to convince the audience of that machinery. He's just employing it to illustrate the thing he's trying to talk about. But it helps to see that is going on. Isabel, you want to give first reactions?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. There are so many things, Jason, so many things. The bottom line, it is absolutely beautiful. It is a beautiful essay, and indeed it is right to be so commented on and so affecting so many different disciplines. There are so many things. The idea, for instance, the metaphor, let's say, or of constellation, that truth is a constellation. How all-encompassing, how wonderful. That can be also techne, not to think of it as instrumentality, but really to go back to the Greeks and see it as techne, and then see, as Dan was saying, the connection with poiesis, and then seeing how he introduces both the danger, which I found most fascinating, the danger and the saving power. And yet the saving power has an essence that is even more primordial than we might say essences are. And we can only hope, also another word. He introduces the word hope to be able to lay the groundwork for perhaps some future thinking. And of course, the concept of questioning. Now, how simple can you get? Children question. That's the first thing they do. They grow up. My grandchildren question all the time. But questioning, to bring it to this level of helping us open up and to say that it is the piety of thought. The piety of, I don't think people even know what piety is, the meaning of it today. But anyway, all these concepts, and I kind of saw a similarity between this essay and one I read a long time ago, not that I understood it much, but The Origin of the Work of Art, that they somehow in some, they coincide in a few ways. So those are some things. I have oodles of notes and oodles of underlining, but as usual, I can't read my handwriting. But as you go along and you listen and I listen to your discussion, I will be able to recollect. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I mean, there definitely are connections with Origin of the Work of Art, both because art and making are in both. There's definitely, he's in this essay, he's using, if I go to this way, the Greek understanding of art and poetic making as the foil to understand the contrast to Enframing or the modern motor revealing, something like that. But whereas in Origin of the Work of Art, he's just trying to focus on that that way in its own right, so to speak. But you're right to see that the essay here is somewhat indebted to that. It's just here the focus is not on that poetic bringing forth, although he does come back to it at the end for sure with all the Hodel and stuff and the poetically man dwell on earth and all that sort of thing. As he gets
Forgot to
poetic at the end of the
mention
essay.
one more thing about this came to mind was so important. This challenging forth. We challenge forth the river to produce electricity, not just to be beautiful flowing river. No, we are challenging. But then what he's saying now is that we ourselves are challenged forth. We are challenged forth. And I thought that turning of phrase and turning of concept was so amazing and fantastic. And in a way, one wants to say, well, then it's not my fault. Well, it's not my fault that I make everybody seem like instruments, that I'm so, I have this Gestell thing.
Mhm.
It's not. In a way, he's saying that, but I like, one of the things that I think is very hard for us to recognize is that we are not the agents here, and that's so hard for us. Who's challenging it? Who's doing the challenging? You know, I
Yeah,
know
so
when we do the.
in an early essay I read on this, I glossed that part as man is ordered into his ordering, from out of what is he so ordered? That's sort of the question he's raising here. That's the way I would put it. But it's not simply who is the agent, it is what agency itself entails, involves, is, that is in play here. It is being glossed, discussed. There's places where he's, even early on, clearly already operating on his own understanding of those things without making the case for it. And he's contrasting it with other understandings that are barely mentioned in passing. But then there's going to be the contrast between his understanding of what agency is with what he will present as the technological or enframing understanding of agency. But you have to realize that what is agency, what is action, is what is human action, is definitely the subject matter here, not outside the subject matter here. Okay, James, first reactions.
Yeah, thanks. That was interesting. Yes, the idea of enframing and it's a form of revealing as techne. It's interesting how yeah, also it's a way of interpreting, modern interpretation of techne as a kind of distortion of the original meaning of a techne, which is related to poesis. And yeah, I enjoy reading the article. Thank you.
Okay. Techne to technology is definitely a change in meaning. Whether or not distortion is enough to capture it, we'll talk about. But yeah, Josh.
Yeah, well, what I find most powerful in what he reveals about technology is that it's not a question of using this and then applying technology in ways that are more humane or ethical. It's not, whether you build a hydroelectric dam or you build a quaint windmill in which you're, sort of appreciative of the ecological, connections between what you're building and its surroundings. It's a shift in the way that we understand what technology is in itself. And this is connected with a shift in the way we understand science, because technology, science, mathematics, they're all interconnected for Heidegger. So it's a different way of understanding not how to use technology, but what technology is in itself. And
I think it's fair. I would also say, I mean, what use is what's part of what's being discussed here. But the thing which is correlate to a lot of what he's talking about here is, if I'm just an economic understanding. There's an economic understanding behind this as well, that is being moved into frame from instead of economics of technology as the constellation of means, if you get me. But the constellation of means and ends being thought of as a human realm, colonizing what is part of what's going on here. And go to this way, the 19th century understanding of all that was in the realm of economics. And this is kind of, he's trying to turn that into something where it's a matter of realm of truth, but the same relations that economics tries to reveal, he refers to here. It may help to see that standing reserve, that term that he is using here, which is also could be translated in German as just stock, is also pretty close to the notion of capital. And we should bring out some of those relationships here. Anything further, Josh, you want to make sure we talk about?
No, that's about it.
Okay, Peter, as opposed to Pete.
Hi, I'm Peter McLean. I'm Portland, Oregon. I'm kind of early on in my journey with Heidegger. I'm currently reading Basic Problems of Phenomenology in a different group, and actually Josh is in that other group, I noticed. And we're in section 20, so we're almost done with it. And that's my basic thing. I had read this essay maybe 10 years ago, and the only concept that stuck with me was standing reserve. That stuck pretty well. But it was a very interesting read into here, and I found a lot of things. One of the things I find interesting was his sort of re-explanation of the four causes, especially the efficient cause, or what is so-called efficient cause, which is taking a complete thing. I mean, roughly modern science is a bastardized, emaciated version of efficient cause only, kind of. And that, I think he put that thing in there where it's mostly a bringing about and setting forth, letting something sort of take off, be itself, rather than assembling something into something that I want it to be. There was that distinction there, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then I got a little confused towards the end. Had a lot of things that seemed to be, he was working towards progressively more determinate things. He had bringing forth and revealing and framing and challenging and setting forth. Was that all a series of refinements on the one idea? These are all sorts of revealings or something, and then
Not simply. I mean, the enframing and the poetic bringing forth are meant to be two parallel constellations of revealing, and that is critical to understanding the structure of the essay. The arriving at bringing forth, though, is meant to be more of a drill down from the commonsensical understanding of technology as instrumentality and human activity through trying to understand that in terms of causality, recognizing that causality is implicated in instrumentality, down to poiesis as bringing forth, as being behind the Greek understanding of techne. So you're going from a common sense instrumentality as what people first think of as technology. He's trying to drill down through the historical layers, so to speak, to get back to a connection to truth. And once he gets back to that connection to truth, then he starts setting up the contrast between the poetic and the enframing mode of revealing. But enframing in that is not is meant to be a something about the gathering together, the unifying structure of all the modern modes of revealing, if I can put it this way, as a system, as an internally coherent system review. And that includes how ends or value fit into it, as well as means or causality. So anyway, we can go through more of it in the detailed explanation, but they're not simply successive things of each other. There's two sort of things going on. There's a drill down to the level of poiesis, and then there's a historical parallel poiesis to enframing.
Right.
After he's established those two things are, if I could put it this way, two species of the same genera, then he's going to tell you then he's going to make something out of the fact that this tells us that things like modes of revealing both exist and change. That is, man is always in some mode of revealing, but which mode of revealing he is in changes historically. And that's sort of the underlying structure of the whole thing, is to take the modern mode of revealing as enframing, turn it into something which isn't just about technology, which is about truth, but then make that truth into something that has a history. And all the later parts about danger and saving power refer to what happens once you recognize that is put it this way, a historically contingent rather than a eternally discovered formation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I did notice, of course, the distinction between those sort of those two paths. One, I guess, symbol would be the windmill versus the hydroelectric plant. One is in framing and storing and treating the rivers just as a place to store up potential energy somewhere that we can then release it when we want to, versus the other way. And I did get the sense that was the difference between poiesis and handicraft versus the enframing. So I was aware of that thing, but I hadn't got all the details kind of straightened out on that.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that because it is critical to what Heidegger is saying here, that the challenging revealing is a revealing. The things which it is disclosing occur, right?
But it affects us. I mean, we get caught up in we enframe ourselves in a sense, so to speak, or something like that.
We're definitely caught up in framing, and there's all kinds of things that can, but I want to underline the fact that this enframing is not a mode of concealing. Enframing is not a mode of lying. Enframing is not a mode of pseudos. Enframing is a mode of truth. That's critical to understanding what he's trying to say here. Okay, we're about to transition to, oh, sorry, did I miss John? John, did you go yet? John went yet. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so sorry. Did I miss anyone else? I don't think so. All right, so we can turn to some of the stuff in the essay itself. First of all, before we get to that, does anyone have any problem with the future subject matter or time? Is the move to noon going to be okay for people, for example, and 5 weeks from now okay in terms of time to get the book and read out of 60 pages? Okay, cool. All right. So people brought up some of the stuff about agency and action. I want to point out that at the very beginning, from the very beginning of the essay, there is a very rapid focus on free. And I put it to you that free is one of the fundamental things in play here, right? He says that the purpose of this questioning is to arrive at a free relationship to the essence of technology. And then he contrasts down at the bottom the different ways of experiencing it: represent, pursue, put up, or evade. We made unfreed and change technology whether they passionately affirm or deny it. And then the worst possible way we can live over to it is regarded as something indifferent, he says, something neutral. So altogether, there's 7 different things there. And I realize they fly by in a blur. They're barely a clause in a sentence. But did anyone pause over those 7 things and ask, what are they? Why this typology? What is he talking about here? How are any of these things related to free? The first is to merely represent it. Why is that here? Why is one of the things that you might be called upon to do with technology would be to represent it? Dan or Pete, you want to jump in here and explain why he would mention this as one of the unfree responses to technology? Pete, you're on mute.
Well,
oh, John.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
I would guess, this might be a place to put a hyphen in between the re and the present. And we're already just repeating how it's already presented to us.
I think it's a little more than that, because he's trying to get at the fact that there is a notion of what service to truth is like that is an extremely passive and theoretical one in the sort of era of positivist representation, that would see the only scientific thing you can do about technology is to represent it accurately as it is, something like that, and would see that as being the only truthful relationship possible to technology. That's one of the foils he's setting up here. The theoretical positivist dissecting what is it as being the only way to react to it, is one of the 7. Sorry, Josh has his hand up.
Well, I suppose to represent it would be to make use of a mapping or framework. You'd
That's
be
the very
dipping in.
next one. That's the very next one. So you're not wrong, but he says a contrast there between represent it or pursue it, where by pursue he means precisely further it, use it. He's linking those together, but there's the theory and practice sides of the modern understanding of it, if you get me. To merely represent and pursue, he joins in with a and, because that's the sort of theoretical and practical side of how the modern understanding of technology would think you are constrained to relate to it. You can only either represent it as it is truthfully or pursue and use it for what it can do practically. So the theoretical representation pole or the pragmatic what you can do with it pole are the ways of relating to it that, if I can put it this way, are allowed and encouraged by the understanding of both truth and agency that is encoded in Enframing itself. And he doesn't have all the machinery here to say that, but that's why he's mentioning these two together. And then he said, put up with it or evade it. Why are those two there? Because besides understand it or pursue it, you could also put up with it or evade it. Why are those two there? Nobody wonders when they see a typology of 7 things from Heidegger, why just these 7? I'm the only one, right? So to put up with something is to treat it as a something you are fated to. You cannot change it. It is outside of your control. You stoically bear it as your thrown existence. You do not choose, right? And you it doesn't have anything to do with you, so to speak. It was put there otherwise, put there before, but you were thrown into it. You have to put up with it or evade it. This is all of the inauthenticities of early Heidegger, of the ways in which every dead assigned falls by not facing up to its almost possibility or something like that. So this put up with it or evade it, to me, are standing in for the popular understandings of even his own philosophy or early version of his own philosophy, as well as the classical, ancient classical analogs of that from Stoicism, or even if you're talking about evade it, thinking of reality as something that can be escaped. He's presenting all of these as modes of interaction with the essence of technology that are not free with respect to it. But you need to understand that to passively, theoretically understand, to actively ask pragmatically what you can do with it, to bear with anything you cannot change, or to evade things which are assaults upon you, alien or intolerable. All of those are modes of this unfree evasion that he's talking about here, or not even evasion, but being trapped within, being unfree with respect to. The next sentence, he says, whether we passionately affirm or deny it. So now he's adding affirmation and negation. He's adding valuation as a, if I put it this way, an attempted core of man's sovereignty, that we could simply affirm technology as our own doing. We could deny it as pernicious to our human ends, and in that way achieve mastery over it by passing judgment on it. But he calls that still remaining unfree and chained to it. We have no understanding, let alone control over the thing to which we are then affirming or denying. And then he says, the worst is that if we regard it as something neutral, for this blinds us, makes us utterly blind to the essence. And he hasn't really, that's only a promissory note at this point. By the end of the essay, he's going to tell you that it's something like a great danger in which arises the saving power, which is the farthest thing from neutral. It's a giant either or instead of a neutral. Sorry, John, question or comment?
So, I mean, we're still free to cope with, these are coping strategies for dealing with technology. That's the way I
Yes, but
read
they're
it.
also they're also not just coping strategies. They are separate from his own alternate understandings of what something like human freedom might consist in.
Okay.
Right.
But so, I mean, he is heading for a different order of unfreedom if he's talking, as I said in the beginning, about that that the essence of technology as a mode of revealing isn't something that we have one bit of control over. That we are trapped inside of that mode of revealing. How is that different from what he's saying here?
He doesn't use the word trapped, for one. The issue is, do we see and respond to it as something actually occurring, in which case we are taking part in the process of the unveiling of truth as it is actually occurring. And that, to Heidegger, is living up to a high historical destiny of which we are capable. Or are we not, right? That's the place we're going to end toward the end of the essay. But we're not at the end of the essay yet. I'm pointing out that each of these other things is a different philosophy's understanding of what something like the freedom or human self-mastery consists in. It consists in the ability to affirm or deny anything. It consists in the ability to represent anything, or to consider it only in terms of its usefulness or lack thereof for your own purposes, or the ability to bear with what you cannot change, or not to accept, but to live only in the autonomously created. Right, all of those are other philosophies' understanding of some kind of essential intellectual power to be free with respect to anything, whether it's technology or not. And he's bringing up each of them here in order to say none of those get you free when the thing that you're talking about is technology. Partly because many of them are already embedded in it, and you can't get out of something by reproducing it, so to speak. Others because it is the put up with or evade have no efficacy with regard to it. They do not change it, whatever inner distance they may give you on it. As for the passionately affirm or deny, the way in which that is also implicated here won't come up until we get to the way instrumentality includes the whole kingdom of ends. When we get to that, we will see that to think that man's power to value and thus to affirm or deny anything is going to break you free from the shackles of technology. This is a delusion, because part of the essence of technology is precisely that it turns everything men desire into a demand for which technology will supply the means or the supply. So valuation is not the freeing power from something which is designed to if I can do this way, reify and technologize any valuation as a demand. I am poetically concerned with beautiful landscapes more than I am with the generation of hydroelectric power. Okay, that just means we need a vacation industry that will order you to the picturesque Lake District on a tour, and do so in an economical way that shunts as many people with that subjective preference through it as possible, without disturbing the ongoing hydroelectric power off-screen stage left, right? So the valuation desire is simply incorporated into and mastered in the system of coordination of allocation of resources that we're talking about here in the first place. It therefore doesn't manage to get outside of the frame, if you get me. The point that I'm trying to make here is that each of these things is, it may pass by very quickly, but behind each one of them, there's a thought of a whole separate orientation that each of them thinks it has a root of human freedom that he is in the process of disagreeing with here. When he talks about trying to prepare a free relationship, the essence of technology, and he's going to build this whole elaborate historical structure along the way, he is doing that in part because he sees these other responses as inadequate to anything like the formation he's talking about. Okay. Anyone else have other go ahead, Dave.
Comment. So to think of, how technology works for us today versus in Greek times, let's take a chair. If I needed a chair 3,000 years ago, I would look at what I had available to me, the wood I had available to me, how I could put it together as a chair, whereas now technology just presents available chairs to me, and it's not revealed to me from the wood and the material I have at hand to make a chair. I just go and buy chairs from the available catalog and to fill in the cubicles in the office that I'm providing. And it's all already there, available to me. It's not revealed to me. I'm not involved in it at all.
You are involved in it, but you're involved in
selecting.
it. You're involved in it in the following way. Your demand or need for chair-like services has already had a conceptual and pragmatic net thrown over it that is going to categorize it into the nearest efficiently producible, serviceable performer of those chair services. And a entire industry has been challenged forth to create those and make them available to everyone with chair service needs. And the chair service needs being fulfilled as part of that, but being provided efficiently is another part of that. And those have to, those must compromise with one another. Getting close to what you want from a chair and what lots of other people want from the chair is part of that compromise, because if you want something very eccentric in your chair, it's going to be a very expensive chair. And it won't be made ahead of time. But if you want something that lots of other people want, it is readily calculable ahead of time that so and so many people will want chairs, will be satisfied at least with chairs of this or that degree of serviceability, et cetera, et cetera. The point is that it's all, your interaction with it is your place in a constellation of demand, right? Your economic positioning is your way of relating to it, both as a producer of them and as a consumer of them. You're consumer of them. Your desires turn into bits of demand, and the technical abilities that are there for satisfying those turns into efficiently articulated constellations of supply, right? And getting those two to match one another as efficiently as possible is what the efficiency of ordering is aimed at. So the point of recognizing that is still a mode of revealing is to say, all of those things are true. It is true that you have there are elements of what you want from chairs, which are very much held in common with lots of other people, right? And that the satisfaction of all of those needs, not just yours, as efficiently as possible, is a way of maximizing a something. That something that is being maximized may not be of much direct interest to you, but it is interest to the system as a whole. Sorry, John, hand up.
Yeah, I'll just tag on to what Pete's saying, but if you're not talking about chairs, or you're just talking about workers or soldiers or people that are cogs in a wheel, it feels like this list is more again back to coping strategy for preserving your humanity. This is just age old. How do I, get on the train to go to the city and use up my own human capital, and still have that half an hour in the evening that's my own little window to do something on my own. Like we're being this evasion that you really can't evade is, to me, more personal than just what chair I'm going to buy off Amazon.
So two different things. There's Pete's comment about the older handicraft relation to the being that you're trying to secure or something like that. There was still a division of labor in those times too, but versus this series of philosophical understandings of human autonomy, so to speak, which he's laid out here. I think they're different. The place in which there is something like a human autonomy in the chair example is not at the level of the individual. It's at the level of humanity as a whole, the whole constellation of human desires as demand as a whole schedule, and the efficient achievement of as many of them as possible, as efficiently as possible. But all of that is this very economic calculation sort of thing. And lots of people have commented on the resulting the ease with which that degree of intermediation and ulterior considerations can be alienating, so to speak, right? But here he is not primarily talking about how it is alienating. He is talking about how there is something about the concrete possibilities of instrumental action that is being revealed in all of that, and man has a role in that process of ordering. That role is not simply a role of command, but it is a role, an essential role. We'll get to the later portions of the essay before that really starts coming out, but okay. The reason these early asides matter is going back to something Josh was saying. Like, he's not just saying that is this a more or less choice-worthy or ethical way of relating to this or that, right? It's not. That's not what's going on here. The having a judgment of this is good or this is bad, or furthering it or not, is not. None of those things are freeing responses to something like technology as a mode of revealing. And we'll get into all the ways in which that's the case, but he's mentioning all of them because it is very easy for people to think the only thing necessary for technology is to get on with it and use it, or the only thing necessary is to understand it, or the only thing necessary is to judge it as good or bad, right? None of those things. It's not going to care about any of those things. This is the fundamental idea here, right? Okay. He says the one that we like to take home the most is that it is something neutral. The idea of the neutrality of means, a very common idea that of the time, also shifting things to the plane of the technological to make it a sphere in which things would be neutral as opposed to contentious, so to speak. It's just a matter of know-how. It's only a better or worse. It's only a question of efficiency. There's only a better or worse there. There is a truth you can arrive at, and there's no reason to fight or dispute about it, right? There's a seeking of the plane of neutrality from other conflicts or valuation conflicts in something like the purely technological. And Heidegger is, at pains to point out that it's not neutral in that respect. And I think we're actually pretty open to that. It's not neutral. With plenty of later history. Okay. I wanted to just mention that because it's easy for everyone coming to this sort of subject with their own philosophical frame, if they're not steeped in Heidegger, right? They will come to it thinking, that's all very well, but in the end, it's just a question of valuation. It's just a question of whether or not we affirm or deny, right? No, those are all summarily dismissed as not going to get you to free relation to essence. The other thing that all these examples is doing, though, is they're carving away things to show what Heidegger is not saying. He hasn't told you what he means by free relation to essence yet, right? You just know he's not meaning all these other things. Okay. Okay. I want to point out that some things going on rhetorically here of he at various times will early in his essays, he'll give you a promissory note of what he's going to do by the end of the essay, right? So by the end of the essay, you have to know what he means by having a free relationship to the essence of technology. Similarly on 313, where he says, suppose now that technology were no mere means, how would it stand then with the will to master it? That is something you should have an answer to by the end of the essay. But here, he has not told you why technology is not a mere means. He's in the process of discussing it as instrumentality, right? But he wants you to leave that question there that will to mastery is not going to get you out of technology, and punchline by the end, the will to mastery is the essence of technology. You can't get out of the will to mastery by the will to mastery. I will mention though in passing, mastery here is being used in this very controlling, willful technical sense, technological sense. It was used differently in the later parts of contributions, where there was a more positive spin put on mastery. We may come back to that. But here he means mastery in the sense of grasped control. Okay. So instrumentality, instrumentality and a human activity are the first two definitions, maybe. And the primary purpose of that is by going through the instrumentality one to arrive at where instrumentality, as he puts it, where instrumentality reigns, there reigns causality. Okay. So what's obviously there's going to be more things after this, but what is the how deep is the level in which causality is coming up here? I mean, leaving aside the stuff we're going to get to about what he's going to say causality is in the Greeks, right? First, we consider technology as a means, even as something like the concept of means in itself, something like that. We arrive at causality. Why? How is this related to technology is later going to be shown to be a mode of revealing? What is being revealed here? Philosophically.
We're getting at the impoverished modern notion that that instrumentality is nothing but efficient cause, and that that's kind of the wrong or an incomplete understanding of it.
Maybe at some point, but first there's just the fact that there's something like efficient causes in the way that the moderns benightedly understand them that works enough to make the wheels turn. You have to first notice that one of the things that technology does is it reveals that we live in a world in which causality is true at some level. We live in a world in which we reason causally, we orchestrate means and ends with some measure of success. We are not living in a chaos. We are not living in an occasionalism in the sense of everything just happens differently each time, right? The arts work, even at the level of the Greek arts, right? There is an element of what is revealed here that we are always already in causal interaction with the world, to put it in terms of being in time. Josh?
What would it mean to say that causal interaction is true? You don't mean true in Heidegger's sense of the truth of being, right? I mean, it could only be true in a notion of truth as correctness, right?
Not simply. I'm saying that even in the Heidegger notion of related to the real possibilities of Dasein's being, right? In that sense. So I'm contrasting the world that Dasein finds itself in, and even things about that world which are revealed by the structures of Dasein being those structures and not something else. There's something being revealed about that world that Dasein is plugged into, which is that it is not a simple chaos. It is not a simple occasionalist world, if you know what I mean by an occasionalist world. And the structure of care itself is entwining Dasein in causal relationships to its world, because how it acts and what it is and what will happen to it are always enmeshed with one another, right? It has real possibilities for action. It being embedded in the sphere of practical action is part of the structure of Dasein, and that possibilities of action entwinement, if I can put it that way, is already a demonstration that Dasein's world is not free of causality, if you get me. Josh first.
Well, so are you making a distinction between causality and, say, some culturally contingent way of thinking that, in other words, so if I were to say causality is itself a culturally contingent way of thinking that emerged in a certain era of history and has gone through various permutations and may not be with us, indefinitely. If that were the case, then I don't think what you've said would apply to it.
Yeah, and I don't think that Heidegger is saying that. I don't think he's giving a full, if I can put it this way, a full radical historical contingency view of all of these things. The structure of care is not simply a historical formation that will be dissolved like an opinion. Pete?
Yeah, so I think what he's doing here with these causes is he's showing that when you make something, you make it in a world where all these things relate together. So you have your material, you have the form that you envision, you have your means of making a chair out of the wood you have, because you intend to use it to sit down in. And so there's this world, this regional ontology that we're in, that's part of bringing forth the chair.
So when he gets to the full Aristotelian four causes, yes, he's going to elaborate all that, but he's also going to modify it somewhat from what it is in Aristotle. The differentiated structure of what all is involved in something like cause or causation may be something that has all kinds of historicality to it, if I can put it that way. It may be related to this or that different mode of revealing. That there is something in Dasein's embeddedness in its world that is related to possible equipmental contextures, to possible arcs of action, so to speak. That is already something that is structurally given in as part of Dasein's essence, or part of Dasein's nature, right? And you need to understand that this, the question of cause didn't fall like an apple on Aristotle's head, right? There's already a reason to be concerned with the arts as an instrumentality and cause, even in a simpler or later sense than the full bringing forth poetic sense that he is elaborating here from Aristotle, right? So, sorry, Josh again.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought. I realize I may have, what I may be doing is confusing your explanation of cause, or your interpretation of how Husserl Heidegger is thinking of cause here, that I'm confusing it with, say, the way that cause is used by writers such as Husserl and certain other ones, where they mean it in a kind of restricted sense, where they are referring to a certain kind of a technologized way of thinking that they associate with the in particular post-Galilean modern science. And so you're right. Am I correct about that?
I'm going to get at why there is such a thing as a post-Galilean modern efficient cause understanding of causality in a second. and also trace some of that back to even shards of it in the Greeks, even before any, translation to Latin or anything like that. But the more basic thing I want to do here is anchor all of this in just these structures of existence, right?
Mhm.
The fact that the sphere, that the instrument, that notions of instrumentality and action try to understand and describe is part of Dasein situation is not a historically contingent thing, right? Just as poetically man dwells upon the earth at the end of the essay, right? Dasein is in a sphere of action, possible instrument structures of equipmental contexture, etc. Right, and all of that is always a distributed with others thing, right? That's part of just the structure of Dasein's world. Every world includes Dasein's action possibilities and the way in which those action possibilities mesh with the action, or don't, with the action possibilities of others, right? All of this, the whole sphere of problematizing instrumentality, right, has existence grounding. Dan?
Isn't this like the structure of Dasein based on existence is not to actually to bring forth? And when we kind of simplify this bringing forth, when we think it purely in terms of instruments, means and goals, and what he's aiming here at causality. So kind of like, isn't causality kind of a impoverished form of bringing forth? It's not like it's true or false or anything like that, but it's not that it is false, but it's still a mode of revealing, but it's an impoverished one. Isn't Heidegger's move here to say this is not, it's true, but it's not enough. We need to move deeper and see this as actually as a mode of bringing forth. Like his movement here is,
where Heidegger is going with all this is to say something like Dasein is always already in the truth and is always already involved in the processes of revealing of truth. That's where he's going with it. But the point is to recognize that anything like bringing about equipmental contexture, real possibilities for Dasein's actions are already implicated in all of that. They're already part of all that. There's no such thing as a Dasein who is structured to merely observe the world, right? The structure of care itself precludes that, right? So I don't want to bring in too much of older Heidegger in here to but the first thing to recognize is just the whole sphere of what anything like causality is. There are philosophical schools, Heidegger's not among them, that want to pretend all of that is more unknown or contingent than he thinks it is. And this is part of why enframing is a mode of revealing, not a mode of pseudos, right? The things which enframing reveals about man's world are in their own sphere true, right? It's not a sphere of concealing. It's not a mode of concealing.
Isn't the like causality appears in that those first domains that you mentioned out of the 7 in representation and doing? Isn't that usually where we put, like, that's where we struggle with and try to understand causality and work with it in those two domains, like
or more than two. The valuation as well. I mean, we'll get to what the actual structure of enframing is, but its ordinary understanding is there is a kingdom of ends, which are human valuations or desires. The human valuations or desires posit states of affairs which would be better in the sense of more valued by man than others, and man acts so as to bring those about, and then in competition with one another over control of the means for doing so, they are driven to do so in the most efficient ways possible, right? And this winds up ordering man into the ordering of the world, but the ends of that ordering of the world are set by values, something like this. And this is at bottom a value thinking, economic and instrumental understanding of human action, but that is perfectly compatible with the philosophy of the early moderns like Hobbes and Locke, but it's also perfectly compatible with the latest moderns like Nietzsche, right? So that's where all of this is heading, but I still want to just show that the entire subject matter problematic is anchored in something which is in existence itself. And yes, all that is going to be plugged by Heidegger before the end of the essay into the question of participation in truth. Lots of hands up. James.
So is causality a certain form of a part of that enframing that he discusses, the enframing of technology?
Not simply. Enframing is a mode of revealing. It is a challenging mode of revealing that challenges man to set about revealing what is in the form of standing reserve, to use the formulations from the text, right? So in all of that, what enframing is aiming at, the word, I mean, is the way in which there is a ordered, ordained, and ordered into revealing certain specific things about what is, right? Highlighting, bringing those out, so to speak. The relation of that to causality is that enframing is about the a certain ordering efficiency relation in all of that, which we'll get to. What does ordering mean? Ordering and enframing are not separate notions, right? Ordering is primitive to what enframing is. John.
I hope this isn't a totally naive question, but if you go back and look at techne and physis, the natural way of disclosing and nature's way of disclosing versus man's producing.
Let's be clear. Physis is not simply nature's way of disclosing, right? Physis is also nature's way of making.
Right, but as distinct from techne.
Yes.
Okay. So,
but that's why he says that both techne and physis belong inside of poesis. Poesis as making includes the way in which nature makes things of itself, physis, and the way man makes things, techne.
Got it. Right. So there's a question in here, but I don't know if I know how to ask it. Is the causality problem, or the thing that we are always already in, causal relation, a product of techne and not of physis?
I think to Heidegger, it is part of the nature of the world and the truth in which we are always already embedded. It's not simply created by techne.
Okay.
Josh?
Yeah, I wonder if you could comment on the relation between enframing and the present at hand, because Heidegger at this point in his thinking seems to say that well, what the modern sciences, particular physics, is doing now is no longer something that falls under the rubric of the kind of present at handness that one found, for example, with Descartes, the self-persisting identity of an object, but rather it's the self-persistence of an enframing kind of procedure. So now you have a kind of a more elaborated sort of form of the present at hand, but given that the present,
it's not simply present at hand. It's the objects that's dissolving. But go ahead. Finish your thought.
But nevertheless, I see. It seems to me that there's a very strong connection between how Heidegger thinks about the present at hand and how he thinks about enframing. I see them as very closely related. And given that, it seems to me that doesn't he think about the present at hand? He could say that at the same time, it's it has its truth, but at the same time, it is also a mode of concealment. It's the present. If that's the way that he talks about the present at hand, I don't see how he wouldn't
So
also
sorry.
need to, talk about Enframing in those terms.
So everything upon which Dasein can insist as something revealed, to the extent that it winds up pretending that more is understood than is, can cover up the mystery and thus be a mode of concealing as well as a mode of revealing, right? And Enframing is certainly not exempt from that. This is part of the structure of errancy itself. And he does talk about insistence later in the essay, especially when he talks about the danger, right? Especially if you talk about whether or not man's own capacities are understood, not in terms of what enables Enframing to occur in the first place, but in terms of the structures that Enframing itself reveals, if man understands himself only as what Enframing says about him, so to speak. But this is, to me, aside from the issue of the dissolving of the object. We have to explain the dissolving of the object first. He talks about how even the object dissolves into the objectlessness of the standing reserve. And we need to understand how and why that happens, right? He's going to trace this to developments in physics and even the history of, if I go this way, the mathematical physics projects in modernity, something like that. But we first need to understand what it means to say object versus object dissolved. It is not simply a present at hand thing to dissolve the object, because the thing which is doing the dissolving is the pragmatic, what the heck can I do with this thing frame, right? The instrumental power understanding of truth is behind the reduction of the object into the power relations and the technological relations it can enter into. If the object is only the set of its causal interactions with other things, right, then, and not only that, it is only the statistically stable forms seen in those possible pragmatic interrelations, then you no longer give it standing even as an object, even as representation. That means you're not simply storing it as present as hand. You've reduced it to what you can do with it. And what you can do with it is the predictable, stable interactions that you can embed it in causally useful ways, whether those are ways aimed at discovering or the ways at manipulation of things. The underlying thing that is going on here is that he keeps saying orderable energy. You need to understand that that's the orderable part is doing most of the work and the energy part is doing less of it. The energy part is seeing that everything can be reduced to its energy potential, but the ordering part is all the relations of entropy, not of energy, right? And the relations of entropy are also the relations of value, and the relations of entropy as relations of value are also what we moderns, around the same time, from work was done around the same time he's writing this essay, would simply call information. Information is just negative entropy. It's just orderability. It's just being ordered. There's more information in something more ordered. There's less information in something less ordered. The idea that you translate everything into relations of energy and entropy, where the reduction of entropy is the increase of information, is the increase in value for man, the serviceability for man's purposes, that is the dissolving frame he's talking about here. And when he's saying that even objects dissolve into that, the point is that the human purposes net thrown over things dissolves the things themselves, right? The only thing that remains is the structure of orderable, useful relations among them. This is not present at hand conquering ready at hand. This is instrumentality as what I can do with it, conquering the stable essence of the object through time. I don't care about the object being stable through time because, one, it isn't, and two, what matters is what I can do with it for its brief moments of presence. And when I say matters what I can do with it, I mean for the sake of all of this orderable energy business, which is the accumulation of standing reserve, which is another word for capital, which is another word for value, right? So the pragmatic and instrumental value relations something enters into, to the extent that they are calculable, is what remains of the thing.
I was thinking of this. I'm sorry. I was thinking of this in relation to his analyses of Nietzsche, which I believe he was doing concurrently with with this writing, in which he talks about, the will, as Nietzsche understands it, is, this sort of this gathering of subjectivity within the subject, and which delivers over to the subject this point of view. And I think that he was developing it, and he used a term to talk about this within Nietzsche. This gathering is as an enframing, and that enframing for Nietzsche it's a steadily constant, that which is in. He calls what's steadily constant that which is in being. Often he calls that which is steadily constant, again, remaining true to the manner of speaking of metaphysical thinking, being. So it's a present at handness.
Well, that latter is a partial limitation of Nietzsche himself, but in Nietzsche's own philosophy, if you pursue it to the end, right, you're getting a view of truth as purely instrumental for human purposes, which means that the valuation human purposes are controlling over what is, of what gets to count as being at all.
Yeah.
Right. So the dissolving of questions of truth into questions of value is part and parcel of enframing. Enframing is saying of everything, the only thing that matters is how much value does it have? How much capital does it represent? What can I accumulate out of it as undistinguished, generalized future means for future ordering, right? The viewing of everything as means in itself is what's going on here, right? And means in itself is precisely subordination to a value frame, not to a positivist positing it as a stable entity frame. Pragmatism is conquering positivism here.
But this is being. Being is enduring presence.
In enframing, what endures is orderable energy and relations of orderability.
Mm-hmm.
That's what endures. The objects don't endure. The objects are raw material to be processed and used in those relations. Economic value is more real in enframing than chairs are. Dan?
Yeah, two kind of marginal observations, maybe what you think also. Like first, I found interesting that he turns in, you spoke in terms like, is this combination of energy versus information? But it seems like, especially these days, it's just information. It's no longer the modern technologies. It's just like this LLM models. It's just about information, and it's information on information. So it's no more energy.
Sure, but that's because the energy, we've learned that the energy substrate is a matter of indifference. It's abundant because it's conserved. We're never going to run out of something that is conserved. The only thing that actually matters is the entropy relations, which are the information relations.
So it's just entropy on information or something like that, or information on information, or entropy or something like that.
Entropy is the negative of information. It's literally the definition of information, and the people that invented information theory, like Claude Shannon, is you put a minus sign in front of the entropy operator. That's it.
And the second thing is this, when the object transition into whatever, just pure information or calculation, is this also like when do you think it's in relationship with Heisenberg, where we can no longer also talk about causality? Like causality also dissolves. It's kind of causality stays kind of with the object, but not with
the causality. The causality that it means is calculability of the entropy relations, because that's what matters for our purposes. And Heisenberg is the person who says if it's not operationally observable, you don't include it in the theory, right? So operationally observable, operational is the controlling term there, right? In QM, it winds up being the case that the only things which are operational in that sense are class averages, not individual outcomes, right? So those are the only things about which you have science, is class outcomes. But you focus on those class outcomes as the things which are calculably stable in the sense of usable for the human purposes that can be made operational. Right, so the operational frame is dissolving the objects into what you can calculate with them, right? Because the calculable and the calculable about information is the entire sphere in which human action as focusing on human value can latch. If you're viewing everything as what you can do with it, you start with what you can measure about it, but the thing you can measure about is only certain things which are stable enough to measure, right? The certain things that are stable enough to measure become the only thing about it which remains true, right? So the thing which is controlling in all of this, according to what Heidegger is saying here, is the background gathering and framing that challenges man to order what is as standing reserve, right? And why does he say as standing reserve? That as standing reserve is the into the truth frame translation of capital, right? Accumulated value that is standing by for delivering the services that have been encapsulated into it. But those services have been encapsulated in it precisely because they have some correspondence to a calculable constellation of demand, that is a value, right? But that value as matching of a supply to a constellation of demand, that calculative matching is the technological frame, it is the efficiency frame, and it's also the valuation frame. The point that is going on here is I'd put it in philosophical terms, the entire economic view of the Hegelian and Marxists of the 19th century, and the entire value, will to power, truth is instrumental reason in the service of lower drives of Nietzsche, have been encapsulated into one thing, as all of them are just talking about reducing everything that is to its orderability relations for human purposes. Pragmatism conquering truth. Pete?
Yeah, so it seems like in terms of the economic value and relating to Marx, where Marx was saying, oh, everything is capital now.
Yes.
Heidegger's saying that, in fact, capital is just financial engineering, a type of technology, and it's the technology, our technical understanding of the world that encapsulates.
Absolutely. So the claim is that the economic is subordinate to the knowing, right? Because the thing has value because you know how to do something with it, right? Before you know how to burn oil for energy, it's a waste product, right? As soon as you know what to do with it, it's a value, right? But the reason I'm using the word capital here is he says bestand, he says stock. Bestand as stock is pretty damn close to capital, right? It is the having accumulated for future ordering purposes, and the point of the economic machine is to be able to, by trading off different ends against each other, make undifferentiated mere means indistinguishable. You can switch what it's used for. The important question is, how much of it overall do you have to meet how many ends of what urgency? And that's the whole view of the whole. When I say view, I mean it's the framework or allocation understanding of capital. Dan?
Yeah, you mentioning that it's kind of like alternating between Marx and Nietzsche, and it's kind of like I was surprised also how close this is to Marx, like the terms economics and like it's reserve, and it's Marx also is one of the few who actually look at technology as not something independent but in the service of the capital, and he said it's a mean of power in like for the capital. It's very similar to what I see here.
You're entirely, but from Heidegger's point of view, Marx is missing the point if he thinks that the sphere in which that is happening is fundamentally economics, because economics is downstream of the knowing relations, right? It's the knowing relations that create the economic relations in the first place. And Heidegger thinks he's hitting the deeper level on which these things first happen, right? So from Heidegger's point of view, the modern economy is not invented by a breakdown of feudalistic relations about farming. It's new ways of knowing make possible a new understanding of purpose in industry that winds up competitively displacing any alternative view, that winds up challenging man into the challenging revealing, if I can put it that way, or if he can put it that way, right? So, but that is a replacement for the understanding of those things as a necessary economic history in Marx, and they are also they're taking the value frame thrown over it, which Nietzsche wants to present as sovereign and master of it, and turning it into something which is simply incorporated inside that system. Values are simply the demand side of the supply-demand equation. Pete?
Yeah, in terms of Gestell and entropy, there seem to be two opposing ways of dealing with things or objects, and the objects dissolving in the, let's say, in terms of toys. To a child, the toys are meaningful in their world. Each of them has meaning, whereas in the Gestell, in the supply chain of toys for Christmas, they're all dissolved into objects in a container ship that shows up on a spreadsheet of the person managing the
Yes.
supply chain as
Yes.
just mere numbers.
And the constellation of dolls, action figures, games, whatever, that are put on the container ship are based upon the foreseeable, calculable regularities in the constellations of demands of all the little kids. And all the little kids have different meanings that they can ascribe to these things, but the economic system only tries to fulfill some majority of them as efficiently as possible, right? So when he is calling this a challenging revealing, for the point of that challenging revealing, those different meanings and desires behind them of those children all just turn into a bit of the demand function, right? Josh?
So to the extent that the object is dissolved through enframing, the same must occur for the subject. Because I mean, Heidegger himself points out, he said the subject-object relation reaches its pure relational ordering character in which both subject and object are sucked up as standing reserves. That does not mean the subject-object relation vanishes, but rather the opposite. It now attains to its most extreme dominance, which is predetermined from out of enframing. It becomes a standing reserve to be commanded and set in order. So, yeah.
So the point is,
yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
if
go
you
ahead.
had more.
No, go ahead.
The point here is that he'll get to what degree the human being can become mere standing reserve. He'll say two different things about it in two different places. When he's talking about, when he first brings it up, he says, mankind never becomes simply pure standing reserve. Then when he talks about the danger, he says the danger threatens that mankind may become pure standing reserve. But there's a but that the danger threatened as opposed to something he says has actually happened. But in terms of the subject as understood within enframing, the desires of the subject are only parts of the constellations of demand. The knowledge of the subject are only parts of the ways in which he is a useful tool for ordering. These are those portions of the restricted sphere of supply, right? So he is a human resource in his abilities, and he is a demand function in his needs, right? And but that whole plugging into all of that is it is driven by the actual possibilities, the realized possibilities of ordering. And from the standpoint of even post Heidegger understanding of that, that means that all of these are at bottom information relations, the information relations of the subject as producer to be used by the supply side of the equation, and the desires of the subject as consumer for the demand side of that equation, right? But the fundamental scarcity driving it is the scarcity of accumulated standing reserve, of accumulated bestand, and the challenge to both sides of the subject is to be as useful as possible as the orderer of the orderable, right? This is the challenge forth into the revealing. Another way of putting that is that both as producer and as consumer, human beings are ordered by the economic system that they are plugged into in terms of what they can do as well as what they can get. Yeah, so and all of those things being at bottom relations of know-how, relations of information is where the the furthest extremity of progressing science has gotten, although usually it doesn't come up. Usually there's intervening objects that matter as the reified bits of Bestand, right, which are only useful for certain things at particular moments in time before they've been switched about. Sorry, Josh, you have further on that, or?
No, I just add that, well, so that, and all this is traceable back to, the Cartesian, S equals S, right? The objects only make sense because they're placed in front of a subject which is equal to itself, gathered unto itself, and which is both.
I think we've left Descartes by the time we're at Nietzsche, because the objects dissolving and the representation frame dissolving happen at the same for fundamentally the same reasons, right? By the time you're at Nietzsche, right, the object is just a set of useful fictions that this particular subject has thrown over the world in order to satisfy his desires better. The desires are driving, and the objects that appear are the useful fictions for that subject at that state of its ability to interact pragmatically with the world that it understands, right? But the desires are driving and creating the objects and the views and the value out of the valuations.
I don't think from Heidegger's perspective that Nietzsche has transcended that basic understanding, which he traces back to Descartes, which is.
I'm saying that from Heidegger's point of view, Nietzsche is that technological understanding, and the Descartes part still has this earlier notion that there's something fundamentally stable about the objects, that they're not just desire. By the time of Nietzsche, the objects are just desire. They've been dissolved into value, and so the pragmatic has conquered the abstract. When you're in Descartes, there's still an abstract frame which is trying to be about something like a truth that is supposed to be is trying to be something independent of the desires of the subject. Whether or not it was actually managed to do so, you can debate, but it was trying to be about something which was, if get it this way, more truth-like and less subject-like than what Nietzsche claims that it is or always was, which is just encapsulated desire.
So it's a subjectivism which really sort of
yes.
It was they're into meaning the German idealists sort of flesh that out.
Sure. In Heidegger's Nietzsche lectures, he lays out a whole history of these things from Descartes as origin of subjectivism to Hegel as consummate subjectivism to Nietzsche as going even farther than that, because it's dissolved even the connection to truth that was still there in Hegel. This is there in the Nietzsche lectures, right? But the consummation of subjectivity as the entities that mankind can interact with are just the projections of his desires. That is the Nietzschean frame at the end of metaphysics to Heidegger. But the point that I'm making is that that is exactly the understanding of the objects that we're getting here as Enframing. Nietzsche is still viewing them from the standpoint of his little the internal subjective view of the internal will to power that thinks that it is dominating and controlling everything. Heidegger has stepped outside that view and plugged it into the economic and social system and the intellectual system that it is a resident within, at which point his exalted posture as ruler of the earth by setting of values has disappeared, and he has just become a raw material in the ordering of the earth. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's, again, taking us through some of the things at the end of the essay when he talks about toward the end of the essay, when he talks about the danger. He talks about the man risks being treated as standing reserve himself precisely as the one so threatened. He exalts himself to the posture of Lord of the earth. What is the reference there? The reference there is to Nietzsche. The reference there is to the Superman project as giving a meaning to mankind as the human values legislating what is, right? Freely created values legislating what is, turning mankind into mere means. In Zarathustra, Nietzsche talks about, the yoke for the 1,000 necks is lacking. Mankind has no goal. He's going to give it one, right? So understanding giving mankind a goal as the project of setting mankind to one end, as reducing mankind to the service of the end, that end being only a projection of desire, right? From Heidegger's point of view, that is consummation of the technological frame. I don't know if some of these things, because they go outside our own text, are clear to people when they're reading along there, and we get to things about the danger. But he is definitely, when he talks about that exalting to posture as Lord of the Earth, this is on page 332. He is definitely thinking of both a modern technological hubris in its general form, but he's also specifically thinking about Nietzsche there, no question. But getting back to this point about does man become standing reserve, he's going to claim that no, not really, because man is still involved in all of this as a mode of revealing, and therefore he is always not simply the bits of standing reserve in all this, which might be the view from inside the system, so to speak, but he is also the participant in the truth of what is being revealed here, right? So this is part of the always already in the truth business. If I to take it back to being in time.
Jason, in what respect is he? Because he's participating in the ordering?
In the revealing that is part of that ordering, right? So okay. He says that the main danger is that the shining forth and holding sway of truth, that is what is endangered by technology. It doesn't come from the technological apparatus. It comes from the loss of the status of the revealer of truth, right? But participation in all this is still having that status, unless or until you start understanding mankind only as Enframing understands him, which is as this human resource and demand function, right? If you turn mankind into human resource and demand function, he is no longer the steward of being, or the place or site where truth happens on earth, right? But even in seeing that is going on, you are participating in truth, right? In other words, the whole point is to the inner distance, the inner freedom from the point of view of Enframing that Heidegger is laying out in the entire essay, is to recognize that as participating in this challenging mode of revealing, man is not simply the thing which that challenging mode of revealing says that he is. He's more than that. He's the agent of this revealing. He is the place where the truth of this is unfolding. He's the place where we can see what is happening happen. And this is where he gets into the business about possible rising the saving power, recognizing that go to this way, history of truth, destiny of man, something like that, is the thing he's contrasting here. And that's why the contrast with the poetic Greek mode of revealing matters to him. To see these two things as two species of the same genera, so to speak, means to recognize that this is a sphere of truth in which such things can change, rather than being locked into the second of them as the final revelation of the eternal truth, which is what positivism or Nietzsche would like their Enframing understanding of mankind to be, right? So recognizing the sphere in which this is happening, recognizing the past that is the parallel form of a different structure in the same area, and recognizing that even in the Enframing mode of revealing, man is participating in revealing the truth of what is. All of that is seeing that there is a aspect of mankind which is not just a human resource and is not just a demand function, but is a truth listener, if I can put it that way, a truth discloser, right? You can see what is happening. So ask what is happening while this is happening. He says that nothing is happening to being. Okay, why is this related to the freedom business? The freedom business, he wants to claim that freedom is not primarily an attribute of the will, he says along the way, because for him, freedom is about the open relation to the open where truth unfolds, something like that. So open relation means not a willful relation, means not a loss in control or a listening relation. And freedom comes from that, as we talked about before, the coupling of Dasein to a free transcendental, to the mystery, right? To the indeterminate, to the unknown. In the terms of the essay we read back in December, he's contrasting all that with insistence. Insistence is what Enframing would like to do, of pretending that the way in which things are revealed by what is revealed about things by the challenging mode of revealing is the only truth about them, right? So that's what insistence would be, but that's just a covering over of the whole sphere in which anything like these different destinings of truth, these different ways of truth, these different epochs of truth occur, that is being covered over by the content of one of them, right? And the point is to pull back and notice that the truth of those, so that those ways of revealing, those ways of truth have a history. To see and participate in that history is to be freed from the content of a single constellation of it, right? The underlying move here is the pulled out perspective, freeing you from being trapped in the locally prevalent illusion, if you get me. Okay. We're jumping ahead, but it's okay, because people raise the big questions, so we have to get to the places where they're brought out. Okay. I want to make sure that the different terms like standing reserve and framing that we've been using all along here are clear to people, because for that matter, even danger. Does anyone have any difficulty understanding what he means by standing reserve or bestand? We'll start with that one. Is it clear to everyone? We've been using it so much that it probably is clear to people by now. Okay, in framing, we've talked about when he says the danger, what does he mean by the danger? Pete?
So the danger is in the mode of revealing of the Gestell, that the man no longer has the freedom because man is subsumed within the Gestell, and that's the danger.
Yes, but what is the danger to? That's the Gestell is the origin of or source of the danger, but what is being endangered?
The open, whatever he has so many ways of describing it, but
331, he says, through this, the other possibility is blocked. That man might be admitted sooner and ever more primarily into the essence of what is unconcealed in its unconcealment, in order that he might experience his essence as the requisite belonging to revealing. So the danger is the blocking off of the possibility of an essential relationship to the unfolding of truth. That's what he says is endangered. the danger is the potential blocking off of the capacity to participate in the unfolding of truth. Josh?
Yeah, he also says, I'm using a different edition at this moment, so I can't immediately tell you what page it's on. The unconcealment of everything time harbors the danger that man may misconstrue the unconcealed and misinterpret it. That's where everything that in presence exhibits itself in the light of a cause-effect coherence. Even God, for representational thinking, can lose all that is exalted and holy, the mysteriousness of his distance.
Yes. So, I mean, is the primary concern for Heidegger that because man loses his relation to truth, he thinks the wrong things about God? Is he primarily concerned that theology will become inaccurate? I don't think so. Its connection to truth is the concern of his piety, if you get me. Dan.
Yeah, it was interesting here. Actually, he said something that the danger something is more, it denied to him a more original revealing. So we are already in a revealing, but the
Yes.
danger is that we are denied this more original. So it's kind of it blocks a step further, the next step further. And Heidegger thinks there is such a step further, and that's the danger.
Yes. Yes. So you're right that even in Enframing, mankind has some relation to truth. The more he believes what Enframing says about mankind, the less essential he will see that, because he will think that his ability to be connected to truth is only his ability to be connected to the kinds of errors without which a creature like himself cannot live, to be Nietzschean about it, right? And therefore, since it's only a matter of a connection to an error, he will not treat it with anything like the importance, centrality, essentiality, or piety that it deserves. But you're right that he's the danger here is the persistence of the mode of Enframing and the failure to take the next step in philosophy, something like that, right? The failure to enact another beginning. Okay. Sorry, Josh, is your hand still up, or do you have another one?
Yeah, well, I think what's, what I'm trying to tie together with Descartes and Nietzsche and Enframing here, and the danger is that throughout this whole arc of thinking in philosophy, whether you're talking about Descartes' notion of truth and representational truth, or Nietzsche's notion of the will, it's grounded in a notion of certainty, of self-certainty. And that notion of self-certainty is the danger.
Not simply. By the time you're at Nietzsche, it's not quite self-certainty anymore. But I mean, you're right that self-certainty is the particular move in Descartes that Heidegger sees as cutting off openness to truth of the open itself. For those who aren't familiar, the point of this move to self-certainty in Descartes is Descartes does not know whether or not his thoughts correspond to the external reality of things, but he knows that his thoughts are his thoughts, so to speak. If he confines his judgments to judgments about his perceptions, then that epistemological move, so to speak, immunizes him against the possibility of error from Descartes' point of view, right? He's going to pull in the extent of his claims in order to render them more certain from his own, this is in the Meditations, from his own understanding. Descartes thinks that the origin of error is people being too ambitious about what they claim. If you're less ambitious about what you claim, you can be certain about the things. But that's the result of making those claims be about the I think X, not X. And from Heidegger's point of view, that is a move that is unwilling to stick its neck out enough to make contact with reality, if you get me. So that's the self-certainty thing that Heidegger decries in Descartes and sees as one of the founding moves of modernity.
But I think he sees it as running through Nietzsche also, because he says that the subjectifying of whatever is accomplished by setting before a representing that aims at bringing each particular being before in such a way that man who calculates can be sure, and that means certain of that being. We first arrive at science as research only when truth has been transferred into the certainty of representation. And he says that's what Descartes, he says, the whole of modern physics taken together, Nietzsche included, maintains itself within the interpretation of what it is to be and of truth that was prepared by Descartes.
Sure, but we'll get to that. I mean, the point about Nietzsche is going to have all of that be driven by less than rational underlying drives, but it is still subjective drives that are in charge. I want to go back to origins of modernity, because one of the questions we had earlier is how much of any of this is this formation of modern technology, can put it that way, is man's conscious doing, so to speak, and how much of it is something which has just happened to man, so to speak, about which man has no control or agency or something like that. One way to look at this is to see you can make the case that there's all kinds of important influential figures in the early modern period that put into place pieces of this enframing structure, right? Even before Descartes, you get people like Machiavelli talking about the conquest of fortune. You get people like Descartes, the conquest of nature for the sake of release of men's estate. You get Hobbes, the restless desire for power after power, ceasing only in death. You get Locke, unlimited accumulation of capital as the all that you're left with as man's purpose when the good is withdrawn and he only has the pursuit of happiness rather than happiness itself, something like that. And that whole series, oh, by the way, and also Bacon in the middle saying that we have to torture nature to get it to reveal its secrets to us. That's the challenging part of the challenging revealing that you also got in Machiavelli. All of those early moderns are self-consciously moving in this direction of nature as something to be challenged and conquered for the sake of man's own purposes, subjectively understood, right? And treating all of that as a grand historical project that is meant to be philanthropic, right? So in all of that, there seems to be a fair amount of actual conscious agency, right? What Heidegger says about this is that the provenance of this move is still unknown. When he's talking about Plato, he says Plato didn't invent the things, he merely responded to what was before him. He will present all of these realized possibilities in modern philosophy as being possibilities that were effectively there in metaphysics that the thinkers responded to. So yes, the possibilities are there. Yes, they chose to go down them, but their choosing to go down them is them responding to something that was already historically / fatefully given, something like that. And that is definitely a different understanding of the role of sort of conscious human agency and all this that you might get from, say, traditional historicism, which might see, the figures I mentioned and their conscious intentions as being behind much of this. And similarly for all the later schools of modern philosophy and the German idealists and others down to Nietzsche, who radicalized some of those early modernist proclivities, so to speak. From Heidegger's point of view, all of that is the unfolding of a logic which is already there in the essence of metaphysics itself. And that's why he sees it as not being simply freely chosen, so to speak. But if you want to understand why he would see that, you have to go through all this stuff about what he thinks of metaphysics as being in the Nietzsche lectures. And it's not actually here in this essay. He's using it. He's not laying it out here. He's assuming it, assuming is not the right term. He thinks he's established it elsewhere, so he's not trying to establish it here, right? But it's fair to say that you could make a case that there is more conscious agency aiming at the challenging revealing as choice-worthy in its own right in the early moderns. The more farsighted among them had a fair sense of knowing of what they were trying to make, and the thing that wound up coming out of it wasn't that far in many respects from what they wanted or what they're aiming at. Okay, maybe not in everything, but certainly in some of those basic characteristics of the challenging revealing that Heidegger is talking about, those were intentional. First of all, any thoughts on any of that, and the early modern project is aiming at the challenging revealing for its own sake? No. We skipped over one thing I want to run back to for a second, which is the the causality stuff, and quickly when he went from the causality of Aristotle to the causality of the modern, so to speak, from poiesis to the modern technology understanding of causation, he mentions along the way that what the Greeks understood by atia, being responsible, what it is to be a cause, was more like a thankfully responsible for the bringing forth of, something like that. And that they didn't think of it in terms of purely efficient cause or in terms of legalistic blame. Sorry, Dan, do you want to get into this before I go down this road, or?
Yeah, going back to what you just
Sure,
said, like
sure.
the historical and modernity, it seems like, and
Yes.
this goes back to I think the motto of this essay, where Heidegger says something like thinking holds to the coming of what has been and its remembrance. So it
Yes.
seems to me that Heidegger is trying to say this, and is also related to that in like what's first, science and technology, and Heidegger's kind of going against the mainstream. So it seems to me like Heidegger is saying these things is actually is there from the beginning, from when it started, like all this, but now is the time when these things is unfolding for in its proper sense, and this is the point where you can actually, it's the first time we can see it. But this is nothing new. This is it's not modernity, and it's not now, and it's not medieval theology, and it's not the latest Greeks. It's all from the beginning is there, and it's just unfolding, and it's now it's
Right,
kind of what you call
and
end consummation and so on.
And people can definitely debate how much it just unfolds, right? Because there's lots of turnings along the way and understandings along the way and so forth. And there, the Nietzsche at the end is not quite the same as the Descartes at the midpoint there, or let alone the Aristotle, inventing logic or something, right? So there are stations along the way, is what I want to say. But the notion that there is still something about any of this, which is a destining revealing, something like that, that's definitely core Heidegger. The fact that to me, the much more easily defended claim that I think is at the basis of what he's doing here is that these large philosophical understandings are driving for the things which are people think of as being exogenous developments in technology or economy, right? The economy sphere is not determining this history. Even the invention sphere is not determining this history, right? This history is being driven by these philosophical factors. The philosophical factors are being revealed hundreds of years later, sometimes in their effects, but the philosophical factors are driving. I think his case there is extremely strong. Whether or not he has also shown that those philosophical factors are a fated response to the dispensation given to each thinker, as opposed to involving more of his own agency and choice, people will differ about that one, right? But that the large philosophical, metaphysical thinkers are driving a development to the point where you can get anything like the notion of the disappearance of the object into standing reserve, right? That is an unfolding of a process, at least from Descartes to Nietzsche, right? And that's not something which is created by the economics of the production of hydroelectric power or something, right? That's not what's driving here, right? What's driving here is the philosophical understanding. Sorry, Dan, does that cover what you wanted to cover? Or okay, I wanted to get back to this point about the Greeks for a second, because the Heidegger kind of in passing makes the claim that the Greeks did not think about atia as cause in this way of kind of legal responsibility on the one hand, or of efficient cause bringing about on the other. And if he's talking about the full understanding of responsible for as thankful bestowal kind of things in an artistic way, something like that, he might be right for some of the pre-Socratics or for Aristotle, right? But there are plenty of Greeks contemporary with the Socratics or just before them, and this was in the Sophist traditions, who are thinking about it in exactly those ways that he here seems like he's associating with the Latin translation, right, of to instrumentality and so forth. I'm thinking of man is the measure, Protagoras and all that. He famously had they had famous discussions, moralizing discussions of what cause meant, and they have an example, which is uh, a javelin thrower at the Olympic Games throws a javelin that kills one of the other runners because he hasn't gotten out of the way in time, and the javelin throw is particularly long. And so they bring in a whole bunch of people to ask, what killed him? And the doctor says he was killed when his heart stopped beating because of excessive loss of blood. That's his understanding of the cause. And the soldier says, well, he had the excessive loss of blood because he was hit with a javelin, which is a object designed for military purposes that that kills people all the time. It was the javelin that killed him because of the metal that it was made of. And the others say, no, the problem was that this athlete threw it and hit him with it. So the cause is the efficient cause is the athlete throwing it. But they overrule all of those and says the actual cause is the umpire who ordered the whole Olympic Games incorrectly by letting these people start throwing the javelins when they might have endangered these people downrange. So he's the person who's actually legally to blame, is the umpire. But you get this same sort of dissecting, bringing about, and ascribing legal blame analysis of causality in a Protagoras in the generation immediately before the Socratics. And it's not the case that that was only invented in Rome or something, and that everyone was a poeticizer down to Aristotle and later, right? There were people that thought about it in the same terms that you see him here describing the Latin translators and the Romans thinking about it in Greece 50 years before Socrates, right, or 30 years before Socrates. So I just want to warn you that some of the times when he gives these sharp demarcations of the way of thought of this whole civilization is, seen in the words of that civilization, right? That is an oversimplification of what actually happens. It's an oversimplification of the variety that actually occurs in each of these periods. And you get people in the time of Socrates or just before that are thinking in the same way that he says is the way the Romans are later thinking about it. Anyway, I bring that up in part because these issues of when does this history shift and where will also be thematic in the Parmenides we're getting to. And from my point of view, one should always differentiate between what is happening at kind of the peaks of thought and what is the common thought of everyone in an era. And you should allow for there being more variety in an era than sometimes you get in Heidegger. Heidegger is always focused on the periodization, less focused on the stratification inside the periods, if you get me. I don't think that it's still, this is a historiographical nitpick more than anything else, right? It doesn't change the fact that the fundamental contrast between the poetic and the challenging mode of revealing is meant to be two species of one genre to show that there's historical change on affairs like this. I think that holds, but the idea that no one thought about causality in the sufficient causality way until Galileo and Descartes, it's not true, right? Plenty of people thought about it that way earlier. And the notion that you think of being as power to bring about is already there in some places in Plato, although from the Parmenidean stranger as opposed to Socrates, and it's certainly there in the medievals, right? Even the relatively early medievals. Okay, just my historical nitpicks with points in the essay. Okay, I want to talk about the saving power. What is the saving power? Pete, Dan?
Right, so I'm actually would kind of like to return to the danger, see if I've
Okay, the danger first.
understood this correctly. So there's the Heidegger's notion that there's there's being with a Sein with a Y, and it was there for the Greeks until Plato and Aristotle sort of invented metaphysics by saying what mattered most is rationality, and then that kind of hid, obscured being, and then historically over time through the Neoplatonists, Avicenna, the Scholastics, Descartes, it got more and more hidden, but it was always available to questioning. That had any of those people asked the right questions, they would have become aware of this being that withdraws and hides itself. But now, with the technological understanding of being, with the Gestell, the danger is that that might get cut off completely, so that man will never be able to philosophize and question what makes things possible, and the clearing might disappear. Is that the danger of the Gestell?
It is. He does claim that it's a kind of danger that if mankind comes to understand himself the way with the insistence that the Enframing understanding has of him, in other words, he comes to understand himself as homo faber, as raw material, as the economic man, as not having a destiny of truth, as being cut off from truth, truth itself just being what is useful for his purposes, an error useful for his purposes. If man comes to understand himself that way, he will forget his possible destiny of truth, something like that. But the funny thing is, he says that it's precisely by being threatened by this so much that it is possible we will notice that that relation to truth is essential to us, right? So the threat of being cut off from it and the recognizing its centrality are two sides of the same coin, right? You cannot realize that your essential nature is X until your essential nature is in danger. But as soon as you recognize it is in danger, you recognize that it is your essential nature, or something like that, or could, because there's a question of who besides Heidegger has and a few readers of his essay has noticed this.
So actually, it's the danger, because of the danger, that then we have the saving power
Yes.
that would finally make us recognize the open, the
Or
clearing.
that man's participation in truth is the highest possibility of his essence. That's the way he puts it, basically, right? And it is by the threat of the loss of X that you notice the preciousness of X. But what the X is precisely this. It's not even that man is related to the open. It's that the event of the appearing of truth needs man, is the claim, right?
Or is the danger that then technology no longer needs man, and
well, it no longer needs man as the revealer of truth or the site of truth unfolding. It only needs man as a ordering raw material. It only needs him for the sake of his ability to exercise his intellect in ways that reduce the entropy of systems he is put into causal loop with, right? He's just an ordering machine, right? Who can, move counters around in ways that reduce net entropy. He's an information factory. If mankind becomes just an information factory that produces value by adding information to subsystems, then man's connection to truth is lost. That's the claim.
So then, let's say, in terms of popular science fiction, let's say in the Matrix, man is just a resource in a pod that's been plugged into.
Yes, which is, and in the Matrix, they're stupid because they make it a battery, right, as opposed to a producer of information. But yes, that's the underlying idea. If man is only an entropy reducing a causal loop that can be put into certain technological systems to add value to them, then he is only that human resource, and that's the only purpose of his intelligence, then you've reduced him into a raw material orderer, right? Which in principle is reproducible with any semi-thinking calculating machine, right?
Right, so technology could go on to explore the galaxy
Mhm.
while having discarded man as just a step
Or
getting it
just
going.
incorporating him as a wetware version of an inefficient silicon chip. But
But
if
why
the
even keep the inefficient?
yeah, I mean, initially for the sake of the demand side of he has more predictable value creation desires. You first need him for his constellation demand because the silicon chip doesn't know what it wants. But
this is
keep them around as the consumer pets.
right, but so the Industrial Revolution needed to create the proletariat to power the factories, but then at a certain point, automation is more efficient
Sure.
than the proletariat, so they're no longer necessary.
Right, and it's a knowledge workers version of that, right? Because it's not the proletariat now; it's the producers of knowledge. It's the scientists. It's the researchers. It's the engineers. All of them are knowledge producers as entropy reduction devices. But as soon as that entropy reduction device is all that they are, that's in principle replaceable. Sorry, John has his hand up.
Yeah, I mean, so good to go back to the Matrix. There's the red pill and the blue pill. It presumes that somebody wakes up and realizes that they're just in the pod, right? It kind of feels that same way. Like, what's the
So in the Matrix, the magical part is that as soon as the person realizes they're in the pod rejects them and throws them out, and then they're left in the real world that they can struggle manfully with according to the hero's journey, right? But what Heidegger is saying is instead the what does Marcus say? All I offer is the truth, right? He's not offering that it's going to be a better. He's offering that it's just that you can be in the actual, right? You can be aware of the actual. You can be awake outside the cave, something like that. It's not a promise that life outside the cave is better, right? It's only a promise that it is truer, that you can have contact with truth. That contact with truth, or being needed by the unfolding of truth, is the exalted nature or proper destiny of man, something like that, is Heidegger's faith/piety of thought at the end of the essay, right? But the fact that he calls the possibility of seeing man as needed by truth for its unfolding as the saving power is because he regards that as saving, right? He's not claiming that it's going to be technologically better for us if we are so saved. Sorry, Peter?
Yeah, maybe I misheard. One comment that Pete just made was something along the lines of, imagine that, we get all inframed and everything, and technology starts going off and explores the universe on its own and everything like that.
Yes.
That struck me as kind of wrong, because I don't think that technology would go off and explore, because explore seems to be a revealing, and the inframing is more of the turning everything. I mean, going off and mining the universe for Dyson spheres and stuff like that. That would be what.
Sure, but the challenging revealing sets upon Bestand and order, and therefore it views everything as potential raw material / capital for further ordering. So it does have this resource constraint background or frame, but as soon as you recognize that the ordering involved is simply information, you can imagine exploration as simply production and harvesting of information as being part and parcel of that resource gathering.
Well, no, okay.
Because
sure.
information becomes the only resource, and then at that point, exploration is just getting information from farther away.
I guess I was taking the word exploration not mean that, but to mean finding the truth, like originals. I mean, people originally were doing science to like find out what.
Absolutely the fundamental thing here, right? But the point is, in the point of view of Enframing, seeking the truth is
Right.
only useful for the sake of the rewards that come from it, and that means that truth is reduced to information.
Right, right. You know, that's what Enframing is. My point was that I
Yes.
thought this thing I was using the word exploration was not bringing
Yeah,
up Enframing,
Pete.
was bringing up the
Yeah,
opposite.
when Pete says that technology could go out and explore the world, explore the universe, he means for information. He
Right, it
means
could
that.
go off in
Yeah.
mine. I was saying mine was different than exploring was what. And so it's just a word.
Let's point out the point of this is we use the word mind to say that the thing that you're getting is merely material and merely useful for some other thing, because we have a notion of mind of matter as being of lower destiny than anything as exalted as truth. Information conflates the two. The notion of information as just ordering has from the positivist all the characteristics of truth, and from the pragmatists all the characteristics of the mind or, right? So information is, from their own point of view, the synthesis of the two concepts that is superior to both, right? And they don't think there's anything to serve besides gathering information, right?
Yeah.
But that's exactly what it means to be inside that frame. Whereas when Heidegger is talking about connection to truth, he's talking about connection to truth as the arising, appearing, unfolding into the open of this, this destining of revealing or something into as shepherding into the actual, as something like that. And that to him is not simply an information relation.
Right. Enframing is not a free relationship.
It is a driven one, it is a challenged one, right? It has its aim set for it, but that's the same as saying, from the standpoint of inside, it has a goal. That goal, it is not an open relation from Heidegger's point of view.
Means, right.
Exactly, but if you give mankind a goal, you make mankind a means, and and soon you'll find Zarathustra talking about chiseling them like a block of marble, because that's what you do with means. You chisel them, right? You make the form you want out of them, right? And woe betide the chips that fall. But the point from Heidegger's point of view about free open relation is, an open relation is one that is not driven by a prior desired end or purpose.
Right.
It listens, right? And it takes its purpose from the thing that it hears or responds to, not from what it dictated to it itself.
Is that the difference between like the mill versus the hydroelectric plant?
Not simply, because the mill can happen in either, right? Heidegger can easily be accused of romanticizing earlier technology. The early mills weren't that way because they wanted to have a closer appreciation for the poetry of unveiling. They mostly didn't know how to make better mills, right? But so you have to strip away a little bit of the romanticizing of the past here, right? But in terms of the higher end poetries, that's Heidegger. I wanted to get, at some point, I realize we may have other people reacting to this. There's another thing I wanted to focus on, which is why he picks the chalice as his example. But I want to give people a chance to ask questions about the other later parts of the essay before I come back to the chalice. But I want to talk about the chalice. John? Anything?
Okay. I just want to read this.
Sure.
This is on page 34 of my version. But might there not perhaps be a more primally granted revealing that could bring the saving power into its first shining forth in the midst of the danger, a revealing that in the technological age rather conceals than shows itself? That sounds to me like grace or something. I mean, I'm using that as a metaphor, but who's doing the primally granting here?
Being.
I know, but this is where I'm lost.
Is being with the Y that is doing the granting a substitute for divinity? Yes.
Okay.
But it's a substitute, not simply divinity.
Okay.
That's why I'm going to go to the chalice.
Okay.
See, when Pete wanted to give an example, Pete wanted to give an example of teleological thinking in objects, he thought of a chair. because we all sit on chairs and we're all office workers and, you know, whatever. But Heidegger didn't pick a chair. He picked a chalice, and a silver chalice used for sacrifice at that. And then when he wanted to explain what this fourth cause was, it isn't simply the efficient cause, that is the logos that gathers all the purposes together. He said that the logos that gathers all the purposes together to destine forth and create poetically the silver chalice for sacrifice. He said it was the silversmith. Silversmiths don't know anything about sacrifice. They're smiths. They work with fire. They work on silver because they use fire to make silver moldable. They don't know anything about sacrifice. The only person who can decide that this is the chalice needed for the sacrifice would be the priest, right? What is the chalice used for in sacrifice? I realize this is taking us a little bit far afield, but it's used for magical transformation of wine into blood, right? There's a whole theological background to the idea of picking this a silver chalice here. And when he says that the gathering person is the silversmith, that's almost a bow to the later notion of efficient cause. The priest needs the silversmith because the priest, although he can transform supposedly or with his agency the wine into blood, or into God for that matter, cannot without the help of the silversmiths transform the raw silver into the chalice. Right? He needs the silversmith for that. He needs the technical worker for that. But the technical worker doesn't know anything about sacrifice, and he doesn't know anything about the exalted purpose the chalice has. He only knows the shape that it's supposed to have, and it should have a certain dignity or something. He may have examples. He may have some conversation with the priest. But Heidegger picks this religious adjacent example with all this freighted backstory behind it, and then he just doesn't mention any of that. And then when he has to tell you the person who is the unifying mind that brings all together, he says it's the silversmith, not the priest. This is characteristic of Heidegger.
Causa.
Yeah, right. This is characteristic of Heidegger.
He's the one that.
Go ahead and finish.
The thing that got me stuck on that example early on was causa finalis, which I was thinking about medieval art. Mm-hmm. I lost you, Jason.
I'm here.
Medieval art still has the purpose of all of the art in the frescoes in the churches. It's all an integrated whole, right? And that art leaves that, becomes in the Doge Palace, some other representation, and into the Renaissance it becomes aesthetics. I was thinking that causa finalis is something that's also changed along with the representation of causa efficiens, the artist or the artisan. But those are two things that have shifted over time.
Sure. I mean, and he says that, these days we even, decline to give the final cause and the name of cause. And this is part of the early modern reaction against scholasticism, which made too much of the final cause and all that kind of thing. And rejected Aristotelian teleology and so on. But what I'm trying to get at about Heidegger's example is that he is not just emphasizing this. Going to this way, the logos synoptic gathering view of the mind that conceives the holy purpose. He chooses an example that has that in it, but then he doesn't engage on the question of the actual anything like the sacred or what it means to make sacred, because what it means to make a silver chalice a chalice and what it means to make something sacred are two different things, and one is much closer to the actual technological than the other is. But at the end, there's ways in which the participation in truth is a lot more like he calls it the piety, the questioning the piety of thought. It's a lot more like the missing priest of the chalice example than it is like the silversmith, right? He doesn't tell us at the end that forging silver is the piety of thought, right? Dan?
Yeah. An interesting thing here. So on where he says about the silversmith, on top of 314, he said that where is the very top there, the causa efficiencies, it's the silversmith. So and next page at the bottom there, actually the fourth paragraph from the bottom, it ends up with says the silver meat is not a causa efficiencies.
Yes.
So he's kind of he's
And
kind
he
of
says the Aristotelian doctrine
saying,
neither knows the cause that is named by this term, nor does it use the Greek word that responds to it. Right. So he's claiming that the efficient cause is understood by the moderns and even by the Latins, because efficient cause is a Latin translation. He's claiming that that's not the way even Aristotle already understood it. He's claiming that the translation of the Aristotelian causation with the Latin efficient cause understood as the cause that is highlighted above all the other causes in the modern period. He's claiming that that is a missing of something that was there in Atia as it was in the Greeks, and is, you know, a lost in translation kind of closing off or leveling down from the original poetic bringing forth, right? But so he is claiming that that more poetic version of bringing forth is still there in Aristotle, but he's claiming it's missed by the term causa efficiens in Latin, right? But to do that, he needs the poetic creation synoptic view logos maker of the silversmith to be what Aristotle is getting at in the silversmith as cause. But that's not what Aristotle is getting with the silversmith as cause. That would be what the priest or architect would be as cause, right? The silversmith is the efficient cause because he knows how to put the right amount of wood in the fire to get it hot enough so that the silver becomes ductile, right? It's a techne. It is a know-how that is involved in even what Aristotle is pointing to there. But again, it's characteristic of Heidegger that he's trying to point towards the higher, the spiritual, the mental aspects of cause, and at the end of human destiny. But he doesn't just go all the way there and tell you that the cause of the chalice is the priest's concerns for the sacrifice, which he could easily have done, but he doesn't. It's too far afield.
and is actually the silversmith or the priest isn't actually the artist, but probably he should have said here.
I mean, who knows, right? In the reality of human technological differentiation, it probably is a joint endeavor. You would get clear examples from other things, but he doesn't pick an architect in the house, right? Where it's perhaps clearest where the intellectual worker is. But the architect is distinct from the owner. But the silversmiths are not liturgists, is the underlying point I'm trying to make, right? They don't know from holy. Okay.
And can I say something more on this before we move on?
Please.
I think to me it's very well, kind of we implied, but we never said it explicit, like 317 there when he gives that sentence from Symposium on Plato. And actually he said that it's what's bringing forth. So bringing forth, all this we talk about is bringing, like Enframing is a bringing forth, and poesy is a bringing forth, and technology is a bringing forth. And it says there that bringing forth actually is this whatever, it's something passes from non-present and goes into presencing. So it's kind of like, it's fundamentally what we mean by something these days we call actual, but Heidegger means by something being. And it's this kind of like, yeah.
So the reason it is not simply that is, at least for Plato, right? Plato is a philosopher of being, but he is also a philosopher of the deceptive appearances of the many, right? He is the philosopher of shadows of artifacts on the wall, right? And to bring into presence and to reveal being and to reveal essence to Plato doesn't simply mean to make phenomenally present, whereas previously it had phenomenally not been present, right? It means to reveal essence behind appearance, right? There's a way in which the everything that poesis does uses stuff that had existed before, but it brings about a revelation of something new that gets to count as actual being, that gets to count as actual essence. Those are the same word in two different languages, being and essence, right? The the point is that the arising, appearing, or shining forth is of something like the meaningful being, and not simply the that it is physically perceptible, or that light bounces off of it, right? The being of the chalice is not a function of the opacity of silver to light, right? So it only becomes the chalice when it comes into the essence that includes all these other things it's embedded in, the meaning things it's embedded in. That's why he picked a sacred object for his example, not a chair, right? But so again, this is trying to differentiate what it means to reveal an essence. And it's very easy for us to read all this as the production of something in the sense of previously nothing existed and now something existed. The Greeks are intensely aware that this doesn't happen, right? Transformation happens. From their point of view, the material is not the object. The object only exists when the form has been brought to it, when the meaning has been brought to it, when the end has been brought to it. The object in its meaning relations is a persistent present standing out of a meaningful against a background of, meaningless, indeterminate, right? So when you read these things about making, you have to keep in mind that none of this is making from nothing. None of this is. The only thing which is made from nothing is the meaning, so to speak, not the raw material. Even in the case of enframing, this is the case, because the raw material is already there, but revealing that the raw material also has the meaning of capital, also has the meaning of, encapsulated value standing by for future ordering, that is a revealing of something about it, which was not just there in the material itself, right? Before the method, no resource, right? It was just gunk in the ground before it was the technology made it possible to turn it into something that was valuable raw material that made it into capital.
And in this, I understand this. So, but Heidegger is also saying, like, Plato is putting the essence there. It's using this, and for Plato is the ideas. What essence is and what is permanent. But Heidegger later says, well, that was a wrong way to get at what's to put it exists. And he says what kind of exists is what's, how he put it at the end of that what evolves,
So you're right that Heidegger thinks that there's a wrong step taken in idea as form or outward look, but the slippery thing in Heidegger is that happens kind of at the fulcrum point between Plato and Aristotle, because by the time you're in Aristotle, it's clear that for him ideas are subjective in minds and they're only about form. But it's not at all clear that that's what's going on in Plato. And Heidegger basically follows Aristotle in his rejection of the intended meaning of Plato himself. But he's just following on that, right? And you can say that this is a matter of the historical impact of Plato, but it's not clear that what Plato was talking about as when he wanted essence to be something like a mental analog of shape was what Aristotle makes it into, right? But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
One more thing. So I found that. So here at on the very end, the 336, he says, he goes back to this, what endures, and said,
yes,
only what is granted endures. What endures primarily out of the earliest beginning is what grants. And that says that
yes,
as the sense of essencing of technology of framing is what endures. So kind of like he's bypassing essence, kind of the traditional Platonic notion of a framing,
yes.
of
you're
essence into this with this. Yeah, sorry.
You're right that this is this is part of what Pete was getting at about people analyzing this in terms of different multiple understandings of essence. But the point about that in essence, the enframing is what endures is it is not the objects that matter in enframing. right? It is not the things that it is applied to. What matters is the relations it enters into, the relations it enters into in terms of orderability, in terms of capital, in terms of information, any of those things. That is what endures, and therefore that is what, to that view, has being, right? The thing which is is conveyed by enframing are those relations, right? That is what is meaningful to it. So that's what he's getting at as the essence of the as enduring and meaningful. When he says that the object has been dissolved into standing reserve, he means that it has ceased to have that status of being, right? It has ceased to have that status of meaningfulness, because it's not just that it is a mere means, it is buried in the into the value relations into which it is embedded, which are the things you can do with it relations, right? And only those are what remain. So I don't think he's saying more there than he's trying to get at what counts as being in enframing. And the things that count as being in enframing are concepts like information, orderable energy, entropy, value, right? Those are the things which are revealed to be being like within enframing. Desire would be another word you could use there if you wanted to, be Nietzschean or Pomo about it. Does that help? He says even there, enframing holds sway as a form of granting. And he says, oh, it can't possibly be granting. Well, if there's something that's revealed as enduring, then that is a granting. There is something there which is true and truly revealed, right? Whatever else is covered over by it. He's very careful in this essay that he is never calling any of the stuff that technology reveals pseudos. He's never pretending that it's fake. He's never pretending that it's a lie, right? It's not an intellectual error that is involved. It is a focusing on only a certain set of relations that is a missing of continents else. Josh?
So what are you attributing to Heidegger the status of, say, raw material that's lying around, before it is taken up, right? In terms of a kind of a revealing, are you attributing that kind of a status to what Heidegger is, how Heidegger is thinking about that which, that he talks about in those terms, in terms of material lying around? Because I would tend to.
I think he's simply describing the view from within enframing at that point. It's not his own view. It's seeing this is the way, this is what enframing reveals the pre-objects to be, right? But the thing which is granted is the stable persistent status of the value and ordering and information relations into which they enter. That's the granted truth, limited as it is.
Yeah, right. So, so what would you then say that Heidegger would want to? How would he characterize what within enframing then becomes, articulated in terms of material stuff lying around?
Not quite sure I understand the question.
Well, he would say that's the wrong way of thinking about it, or not wrong, as opposed to correct, but rather a limited way of thinking.
He's not going to say it's the wrong way of thinking about it. What he's going to say is that even when thinking about it that way, the most important thing to notice is that there is a participation in the revealing of a granted stable truth by the human being so contemplating those things.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that's the place in which a connection to truth remains, even in the, if I can put it this way, the technologically embedded person and his and the way he sees the world. And that that is, from Heidegger's point of view, a leverage point he wants to use to get that person to see that open and those relations of truth still matter to him, right? Not simply what he can do with things. Heidegger, in many places, is at pains to try to reach the person who might in an earlier era have been in a profession dedicated to service to the truth, but now is embedded in instrumental relations which tend to sever that connection. He's always trying to reattach that muscle, so to speak, to reopen that. Didn't you get into this because you were seeking and trying to serve something like truth, not for the sake of advantage your career or manipulation or whatever, right? He wants to reestablish that connection. That's what's involved in this. Questioning builds away. Questioning is the piety of thought. He's trying to awaken that curiosity and truth connection in the listener. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So you're looking for another passage to ask about.
No, it's not what he can do with, that is to say, in order to, it is for the
Yes.
sake of which, and for the sake of which doesn't mean, again, for the sake of pre-existing purposes. But it is it's a relation with. It's neither a relation with
Yes.
of in order to, neither
Right.
is it a relation with that is for the sake of with. If we interpret for the sake of, in terms, again, that takes us back to this notion of a pre-existing purpose.
And look, there's no question that if someone wants to put their either Nietzschean value or Platonic good understanding over Heidegger himself, they will find that he has pre-existing purposes. His pre-existing purposes are just all about listening in connection to truth, right? But he has them, right? But he wants them to be open, meaning he wants them to be something which he is not prescribing to things, but which he is hearing out of things. But there's no question that a Platonist would say that is his orientation towards what he thinks is the good. He thinks that an open connection to transcendent truth is the good. From the standpoint of a Platonist, that's his prior attachment, right? From the standpoint of a Nietzschean, he has a will to truth that he is elevated above the concerns of other men, and that is his will to power from a Nietzschean point of view, right? But each of these people can translate even someone like Heidegger's position into their own frame. They might have to distort him a bit to do that in terms of his own understanding. But he does have a detectable, prior ethic, if you like, and that's what the end of the essay, attaches to when he says questioning is the piety of thought, right? And the poetically man dwells on earth, right? He's pointing to these things. Are those attachments prior, or are those attachments posterior, right? From his own point of view, they're posterior. There are things he has discovered. There are things that this history reveals to us as being higher possibilities, but one can be more or less psychological about that and doubt how prior or posterior they are, up to the reader to determine and up to the reader to share. I've managed to get through in only 3 hours the parts I wanted to get to. I mean, we didn't go through this in a systematic order as I might have liked, but we covered all the things I wanted to cover. So I'm going to give people a chance to give their comments on the session. All right. Sounds like there's not a ton of comments in the session. So a reminder that for next time, we're going to be in 5 weeks, and we're going to be doing the first 57 pages. That's to the end of part 1, section 3, the part about pseudos in the Parmenides. All right, well, those are great questions and very lively. That's always wonderful. Thanks everyone for participating, and this session video will go up on YouTube later tonight. Thanks everyone for attending, and hope you can make it again. Oh, John, a question.
Yeah, you can cut this out if you want, but I, as a newbie to all this stuff, keep encountering Greek words.
And
yes. I have like some of the text, like the sophist, there's so much Greek in it, and I have no way to translate it. Is there a good source?
A good source. I mean, the usual things is to tell people to use, Google Translate LLMs. I find that
That's
having,
what I've been doing, but it's like, man,
I find that having I mean, old school Cambridge Greek lexicon. The thing that lexicons give you that translators don't is other places the word is used, right?
okay,
And also the adjacent words, because often you will really get the sense of the meaning from the adjacent words, meaning the other inflections, other constructions that use it. But that's the sledgehammer version, right?
got it.
The sledgehammer
Okay.
version is get a Greek English lexicon. The minor, modern technological version is try to, get an LLM to help you. But
Okay,
it's a fair question.
thank you.
I do the old school way because I'm pre-LLMs, right?
Right, right. No, I was reading Thomas Sheehan's Making Sense of Heidegger, and it's got so much Greek in it. And
Sure,
it's like, and I don't know what the expectation is there for the reader.
The expectation is that there's a certain amount of vocabulary of Greek words of philosophical import that you will get by osmosis by every time you see it, looking it up to translate it for yourself, and then seeing how it is used, and occasionally reading bilingual translations, etc. And that over time you will learn all the nuances of aletheia or phusis or logos, etc. Some of this will come up in what we're about to read. Aletheia is kind of the subject matter. Yes, it means truth. It also means unconcealment, but all the ways in which it means that and why it means that is going to be kind of the subject matter of the book. But yes, there will be untranslated bits that you have to grasp poetically. And it's just, by the way, the same thing happens with Heidegger's German, right? But it tends to be more translated for us. But you're not the only person with this issue. It honestly is just a matter of time and familiarity.
Okay.
Fine
Thanks
question.
so much.
Yep. All right. Thanks, everyone.